name is Leah Winters. I'm 31 years old, and I swore I would never let anything or anyone close to me again. Not after what happened last spring. Not after Ethan. Not after I walked away from the wreckage of a life I thought I wanted, and into this quiet, aching solitude. I live alone now, in a small one-bedroom apartment above a florist shop. The kind of place that smells like dust and old coffee, with thin walls and creaking pipes and windows that don't quite shut right in the wind. But it's mine, and it's safe. Or, at least, it was. Until he showed up. It was nearly midnight when I first heard it. A sound I couldn't place. Not a knock. Not exactly. More like a soft tap, followed by a faint scratching. I paused the movie playing on my laptop, some half-hearted rom-com I wasn't even watching, and held my breath. Tap. Scratch. Tap. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't my imagination either. I lived on the second floor. No trees near the windows. No reason for anything to be tapping at my door. I stood slowly, wrapping the frayed throw blanket tighter around my shoulders. My mug of chamomile tea sat untouched, long gone cold. I stepped towards the door, heart beginning to beat a little harder. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I should have stayed silent, kept the lights off, gone to bed, and pretended the world didn't exist. But I didn't. I opened the door, and there he was. He wasn't what I expected. A dog, medium-sized, sandy-coloured fur soaked through from the rain. His ribs showed faintly beneath his coat, and his ears hung low, not in fear, but exhaustion. He looked up at me with eyes so round and dark, I felt my chest ache just meeting them. He didn't bark, didn't growl, didn't whine. He just looked at me, like he'd been waiting, like he'd known I was here. I stood there for a long moment, stunned by the quiet weight of him. "Where did you come from?" I asked softly. He tilted his head. It was absurd, but it felt like he understood. I should have closed the door. I should have said, "Sorry, buddy," and left him out there to find his way back to wherever he'd come from. I didn't even like dogs anymore. Not after what happened with Max. Max was the golden retriever Ethan and I got together just before everything fell apart. When we split, he took the dog. I didn't fight him on it. I didn't fight him on anything. Since then, I hadn't let myself feel anything remotely close to connection. But this dog, this wet, trembling, silent creature, didn't ask for anything. He just waited, and something inside me cracked. "Okay," I whispered. "Just for tonight." I let him in. He didn't bolt inside like an animal desperate for warmth. He walked, calm, careful, dignified, as if he didn't want to overstep, as if he knew he was stepping into a wounded place. I found an old towel in the hallway closet and dried him as best I could. He didn't resist. He just stood there, letting me do it, his eyes never leaving mine. There was leftover chicken in the fridge. I put it on a plate and placed it on the floor. He didn't devour it like he hadn't eaten in days. He ate slowly, gratefully, like a guest with manners. I gave him an old blanket near the space heater and told myself it was just for one night. Just a kindness, a favour for the universe. I didn't name him because naming means attachment, and I couldn't afford another goodbye. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, listening to the rain tapping against the windows, my ears straining for every little sound. I half expected the dog, who I'd mentally started calling stranger, to whine or scratch or knock something over. He didn't. He just slept, curled up near the heater, chest rising and falling in perfect peace, like he had finally found what he'd been searching for, and somehow that terrified me more than anything. Morning came. He was still there. I snapped a photo of him with my phone and posted it to the local lost and found pet group online. Then I added another post to the community app and printed a couple of flyers to pin on street posts later. I told myself I was being responsible, that I wanted someone to claim him, that I didn't want him to stay. But when I looked over at him, resting his head on his front paws, watching me work from across the room, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Company. Real, quiet, non-demanding company. I started calling him Buddy on the second day, just so I wouldn't keep saying "hey dog" every time he looked up at me. He followed me from room to room, sat beside the kitchen counter while I made tea, curled near the bow door when I showered, rested beneath my desk when I worked. He never barked, never begged, never demanded. He just was. And I started to wonder if maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. On the third day, I got a call. A woman named Jenna. She'd seen my online post, said she recognised the dog, said his name was Rusty and he used to belong to her cousin. Her cousin had passed away 6 weeks ago, and Rusty had escaped the yard during the memorial. She sounded unsure, hesitant, like maybe she didn't really want him back, but she said she'd come by the next morning. I said, okay. And then I hung up and looked over at Buddy. He was asleep, one ear flicking as if he'd heard every word. My stomach twisted. That night, I couldn't stop watching him. I sat across the room, arms wrapped around my knees, heart heavy. He shifted and opened his eyes, lifted his head, looked straight at me, and in that moment, I hated how fast I'd let him in, how easily I'd let myself believe I could care again. I didn't think I had anything left, I whispered. Not after what Ethan did, not after everything I gave up. But then you knocked on my door, and suddenly I remembered what warmth felt like. He stood, walked over, and laid his head on my lap, and I cried. Not loud, not messy, just quiet tears that slipped down my cheeks and into his fur. The next morning he was gone. The blanket was empty, the heater cold. The back door, usually jammed shut, was cracked open. He'd slipped out during the night, just like that. Jenna never came. No more calls, no messages, nothing. It felt like I'd imagined her, or maybe he'd known. That night, I left the front door unlocked. Not smart, not safe, but I did it anyway, and I waited. I waited with the lights off. I waited as the hours ticked by. I waited with that aching, impossible hope swelling in my chest. And at midnight, I heard it tap, scratch, tap. I ran. I didn't hesitate. I threw open the door, and he was there, soggy, muddy, panting. But those eyes, those same deep, knowing eyes. He waited all night, outside my door, and this time, when I let him in, I didn't say, just for tonight. I said, welcome home. I didn't sleep that night. After I let him in, after I wrapped him in a towel and whispered, you're safe now, I just sat there, on the floor, next to him. The heater hummed in the background, and the world outside faded to nothing. He lay down slowly, as if unsure whether he was truly allowed to be here again. His eyes scanned the room, then rested on mine. I saw something in them that didn't belong to a stray or a lost pet. I saw recognition, not of the place. Of me. And I realised something that made my throat tighten. He hadn't come back because this apartment was warm, or because I'd fed him chicken. He hadn't come back because he was a dog in need. He'd come back because I needed him. The next morning, I took down the flyers. There were only 2, taped to a bus stop pole and the corkboard inside the grocery store. It felt strange, pulling them off, like I was making a quiet, irreversible decision. But I didn't hesitate. No one had called in 4 days, and now I didn't want them to. I didn't want to answer the door to a stranger saying, "That's my dog." I didn't want to hear a name that wasn't Buddy. I didn't want to let go again, because I had let go of so many things, of Max, of Ethan, of the version of myself that once believed in simple joys. But Buddy, he made those joys feel possible again. Later that day, I took him for a walk. It wasn't far, just around the block. I didn't even have a leash. I used a scarf tied gently around his neck and hoped he wouldn't bolt. He didn't. He walked beside me, step for step, tail low and wagging, ears perked, head turning every now and then to check on me, as if making sure I hadn't changed my mind. People glanced at us, some with polite smiles, others with indifference. One woman, walking her own golden retriever, looked at Buddy with narrowed eyes like she thought she recognised him. I felt my chest seize up, but she said nothing, just moved on. When we got home, Buddy trotted inside like he'd done it 1,000 times, straight to the heater, where his towel from the night before still lay. He dropped down with a sigh, and I smiled. Over the next week, we developed a rhythm. In the mornings, he'd wait patiently outside the bathroom door while I showered. When I opened it, he'd wag his tail and greet me like I'd been gone for hours. During the day, he'd nap while I worked at my desk, occasionally nudging my foot with his nose when he wanted to go outside. He never barked, never chewed furniture, never caused trouble, just existed beside me, silently, steadily, like a heartbeat I hadn't realised I'd been missing. One afternoon, I got brave. I bought him a proper collar, navy blue, soft, with a tiny silver tag that simply said, "Buddy." The woman at the pet store smiled at me when I brought it to the counter. "New rescue?" she asked kindly. I nodded. Something like that. The tag clinked softly when I clipped it on his collar that night. He blinked up at me and gave a small sneeze, as if in approval. I crouched down and rested my forehead against his. "Mine now," I whispered. "Okay." He didn't answer, but he didn't leave either. That night, I dreamed of Ethan. Not the angry version. Not the one with the sharp voice and cold eyes, but the old Ethan. The one who once held my hand during thunderstorms and danced with me in grocery aisles. In the dream, we were in our old apartment, the one with the balcony and the navy blue curtains. I was cooking something. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. "You always smell like cinnamon," he whispered. I turned around to answer, but it wasn't Ethan standing there. It was Buddy. I woke up with tears on my face and his head resting gently on my foot. The next morning, something felt different. Buddy wasn't by the bed, or in the hallway, or in the kitchen. Panic flared in my chest. I searched every room, opened the front door, called out down the stairs. Nothing. I even checked the back alley behind the florist's shop. The cold air bit at my cheeks, but I barely noticed. I kept calling. "Buddy, Buddy, where are you?" No answer. No familiar paw steps. No flash of sandy fur. on the steps, wrapped my arms around my knees and whispered, "I knew it. I knew it was too good to last." My heart ached in places I didn't even know were still alive. I don't know how long I sat there. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. The sun had dipped low, casting long shadows on the cracked sidewalk. My fingers were going numb from the cold. Then I heard it pause on pavement. Steady, unrushed. I turned. Buddy rounded the corner, tail wagging, nose twitching as if to say, "What's with the drama?" He trotted up to me, licked my hand once and sat beside me like it was the most normal thing in the world. I stared at him, blinking back tears. "Where did you go?" I asked. He gave me a small, low whine, almost sheepish. I noticed something clamped gently in his mouth. A glove. My glove. I dropped it the day before while unlocking the mailbox across the street. I hadn't even noticed it was missing. "You went to get this." His tail thumped softly. I laughed and cried at the same time. That evening, I fed him his usual bowl of boiled chicken and rice. I gave him an extra treat, something the lady at the pet store called a training bone, though I had no intention of training him to be anything other than what he already was. Perfect. He lay at my feet while I read a book, occasionally shifting his weight so some part of him was always touching me. I realised I hadn't felt this safe in years, not even with Ethan. I posted an update to the neighbourhood app that night. "Buddy is staying with me. No claims, no collar, no chip, and a whole lot of heart. If he had a home, he's made a new one now." A few likes. One comment. Sounds like he picked the right person. I stared at the screen, then back at Buddy. He looked up, blinked once, and rested his head on my knee. Some people rescue animals, but sometimes it's the animal who rescues you. There's something strange about learning how to be soft again. It doesn't come back all at once. It's not like flipping a switch or taking off a mask. It's slower, quieter. It sneaks in through the cracks when you're not looking, through a touch, a sound, a presence so steady it stops feeling like company and starts feeling like safety. That's what Buddy became for me. Not just a dog, not even a pet. He became the breath I didn't know I was holding, the space between thoughts, the silence I didn't want to escape from. And on the day it all came crashing back, he was the only reason I didn't fall apart completely. It started with a phone call, an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. "Hi, is this Leah Winters?" My hand tightened around the phone. "Yes." "This is Melissa Stone. I'm a paralegal with Harland and Briggs. I'm calling on behalf of your ex-partner, Ethan Carlisle." My breath caught in my throat. I turned my head slowly toward Buddy, who was sleeping on the couch, one paw twitching in a dream. "I'm sorry to bother you," she continued, "but Mr. Carlisle is finalising some estate matters and, well, there's a box here addressed to you. It's from several years ago. He asked if we could arrange to return it." A box. From Ethan. Something he'd kept from the time we were together. Hidden away, never mentioned, and now suddenly unearthed, like some fossilised piece of a version of me I'd buried long ago. "Sure," I said, my voice thin. "You can send it here." I gave her the address, hung up, sat very still, and waited. The package came 2 days later. Medium-sized, worn at the corners. My name scrawled across the top in Ethan's unmistakable handwriting. Sharp, clean, and cold. I stared at it on the counter for nearly an hour before I finally opened it. Inside was a mix of things that should have meant nothing, miss you, or if you even care anymore. But I've kept this stuff longer than I should have. It felt wrong to throw it away, and I didn't have the guts to look at it until recently. I was wrong about a lot of things, about how I treated you, about Max, about what we had. I think you loved harder than I deserved, and I think I was too scared to meet you halfway. If you found peace, I'm glad. If you haven't, I hope this isn't a setback. Just closure. EI didn't cry right away. I folded the letter, placed everything back in the box, closed it carefully, like sealing up a wound I didn't want to look at again. Then I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at nothing, until my knees buckled and I sank to the floor. That's when the tears came. Not the quiet kind, the real kind, the shaking kind, the kind that come from somewhere deep and hidden and old, the kind you convince yourself don't exist until they rush out all at once and you realise just how much you've been holding in. I pressed my palms to my eyes, trying to stop it, and then I felt it. Warmth. Wait, Buddy. He didn't bark, didn't whine. He didn't try to lick my face or nudge me to get up. He just laid down, right beside me, pressed his body against mine, as close as he could, rested his head on my thigh, and looked up at me like he'd been waiting for this moment all along. And that's when I really broke. Because there's nothing more disarming than someone, human or not, who sees you at your ugliest and doesn't flinch. I turned my body slightly and curled into him, my arms wrapped around his shoulders, my cheek pressed to his back. His fur smelled faintly of lavender shampoo and winter air. He didn't move. He let me cry, all of it, until I had nothing left. Later, we lay together on the floor, both of us stretched out like puzzle pieces. The afternoon light shifted across the ceiling, and the box on the counter became just that. A box. A container of things that no longer defined me. I looked down at Buddy, whose eyes were half closed but watching me still. I'm okay, I whispered, brushing his fur. Really? He blinked slowly, then sighed. It sounded like forgiveness. That evening I made tea and played the CD from the box. It was full of music I hadn't listened to in years. Folk songs, indie road trip tracks, acoustic covers that used to make me feel like the world was big and possible and waiting. Songs that made me remember who I was before I let love turn into compromise and silence. Buddy lay beside me, his head resting against the couch leg. Every time I shifted, he adjusted, like he was tethered to me by some invisible string. I didn't think dogs could teach you things about grief, but they do. They teach you about presence, about how healing doesn't always look like fixing. Sometimes it looks like lying quietly beside someone while they fall apart and staying there after they do. A week passed. The days got colder. The sky stayed grey. Christmas lights began to show up in windows, though mine stayed dark. I wasn't ready for holidays. Not yet, but I was ready for walks. Real ones. We started venturing further. Through the park, down the river path, past the old library. Buddy didn't pull on the leash. He stayed beside me like a shadow. Always watching. Always waiting. Occasionally, he'd stop and stare at something I couldn't see. An old tree, a bench, a puddle. And I'd pause too. Maybe that's what healing is. Learning to pause. Learning to notice. One afternoon, we passed a little boy walking with his grandmother. The boy gasped when he saw Buddy and knelt down with wide eyes. "Can I pet him?" he asked politely. I hesitated. Buddy looked looked at me as if to say, "It's okay." "Sure," I said. "He's gentle." The boy ran his fingers through Buddy's fur. "What's his name?" "Buddy." "Does he do tricks?" I smiled. "He does something better." "What?" "He listens." The boy giggled and hugged him. Buddy licked his cheek. The grandmother smiled at me like she understood something unspoken, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a ghost. That night, I lit a candle. Just one. Soft and flickering in the living room. I placed it on the table, sat down on the floor beside Buddy, and whispered into the stillness, "I'm not angry anymore. It wasn't for Ethan. It wasn't even for me. It was for the part of me that had stopped believing in connection. That part was healing because he wouldn't let me cry alone. There's something unnerving about silence when it shifts, when it goes from comforting to alert, from peaceful to loaded. It had been almost 3 weeks since Buddy returned to me, since I had started to breathe like a human being again, since I had cried into his fur and found a kind of steady rhythm I hadn't known I needed. And in that time, he had become my anchor. But lately, he had also become my warning system. It started small, barely noticeable at first, a sudden pause in his walk, a low, almost inaudible growl at a shadow that looked like nothing, ears perked. During the night, eyes trained on the door. At first I brushed it off. He was a dog. Dogs hear everything, right? But as the days passed, the unease grew, and then the knock came. It was a Thursday evening, late, the kind of dark that settles deep into your bones. Rain was tapping against the windows, and Buddy was curled at my feet while I typed out an email for work. Then his head snapped up. He didn't bark. He just stood, slowly, quietly, every muscle in his body tensed, his eyes fixed on the front door. Turned in my chair. "What is it?" I asked, voice low. Then 3 sharp knocks. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. No one ever came by. Not at that hour. Not without texting first. Buddy stepped in front of me, positioning himself between me and the door. Something in me tightened. I moved toward the window, pulling the curtain back just an inch. A man, tall, hood up, standing just outside the glow of the porch light, not moving, not turning, just standing there. My stomach dropped. Buddy let out a low growl, guttural and deep, not angry, not defensive, protective. I didn't answer the door, didn't speak, just waited. The man didn't knock again. After a minute, he turned and walked off into the dark. I stayed up most of that night, every creak in the floorboard sending my heart racing. Buddy lay in front of the door like a soldier, guarding, still, awake. I didn't sleep, but I felt safer with him there than I would have with any lock in the world. The next morning, I convinced myself it was nothing. A wrong address. Someone looking for a friend, maybe a delivery guy who got lost. It had happened before, once or twice, but Buddy didn't let it go. That day, during our walk, he was different, more alert, head turning at every sound. He didn't stray far from me. When a car slowed down as it passed us, just a little too slow, he stepped in front of me again. I told myself I was being paranoid, but Buddy wasn't paranoid. He was certain. That weekend, I ran into Melissa, the woman who managed the florist, shop downstairs. We'd never spoken much before, but she stopped me as I came down to get my mail. "You okay up there?" she asked, brushing wet leaves from her coat. I blinked. "Yeah, why?" She frowned. Someone came by the other night, said they were looking for you, knocked on the wrong door first, scared Mrs. Atomy down the hall half to death. I felt a chill spread through me. What did he look like? She shrugged. Big guy. Hood up. Didn't see much of his face. I told him I didn't know where. You were. Just to be safe. He left pretty quick after that. I swallowed. Thanks for telling me. She nodded and gave Buddy a pat on the head. Good boy, huh? I nodded. The best. That night, I checked every window, every lock. Buddy followed me from room to room like he was on patrol. We didn't speak, of course not, but it felt like we were working together, preparing for something unspoken. When I finally settled on the couch with a cup of tea, Buddy lay beside me, but didn't relax. His eyes stayed open, watching. Then, at 3:47 a.m, I woke to a sound, a faint click, like metal, a doorknob. My breath caught in my throat. Buddy was already up, at the door, silent. Then another sound, a creak, soft, barely audible. The back stairs. I moved slowly toward the door, heart thudding so loudly I was afraid it might give me away. I glanced through the peephole. Nothing. But Buddy didn't move. I waited. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Faint. Leaving. Not approaching. Retreating. I locked the deadbolt. Then slid down to the floor, shaking. Buddy sat beside me. He hadn't barked. Hadn't lunged. He hadn't needed to. He knew someone had been there. And he made sure they knew he knew too. The next morning, I called the police. There wasn't much to report. No break-in, no damage, no face to give. But I told them everything. The knock. The man. The nighttime noises. The patrol car came by later that evening, slow and deliberate. They said they'd keep an eye on the block. But what they didn't say was the part I felt in my bones. Someone had come looking for me, and I didn't know why. For a few days, the air remained thick. Buddy wouldn't leave my side. I took time. Off work, we stayed indoors. I slept with the lights on, sometimes with my keys clenched in my hand like a weapon. And yet, through it all, Buddy stayed calm. He didn't panic. He didn't pace. He watched. He waited. He made me feel like I wasn't alone. And in that time, I realised something strange. I wasn't scared because I was in danger. I was scared because for the first time in a long time, I had something to lose. One morning, a letter came in the mail. No return address. Inside, one photograph. A photo of me and Buddy, taken from a distance. We were sitting on a bench in the park, maybe a week earlier. I was laughing. He was lying at my feet. It sent ice straight through me. I didn't know who sent it. I didn't know why. But Buddy sat beside me as I stared at it. His body pressed against mine, his warmth grounding me. And in that moment, I knew something with absolute clarity. I didn't care who it was. I didn't care what they wanted. I wasn't going anywhere. Because Buddy had chosen me, and I had chosen him. There's a particular kind of fear that lingers. Not the jolt of sudden danger, not the dramatic kind they put in movies. It's quieter, slower. It sits with you like fog, heavy and clinging. It doesn't knock down the door. It seeps through the cracks. That's the fear I lived with after the photograph arrived. I kept the blinds drawn, walked different routes, slept in shifts. I told myself it was temporary, that whoever had taken that photo was gone. Maybe it was just a fluke. Maybe it was someone from my past. Maybe it had nothing to do with me. But deep down, I knew better. Buddy knew too. He was restless now. Not anxious, not frightened, just alert. He stayed near the windows, his ears flicking at the slightest sound. He'd lift his head at 2 a.m, as if he'd heard a footstep from blocks away. He refused to eat unless I was nearby, and I didn't mind, because he wasn't just protecting me anymore. I was protecting him too. On Monday, a second envelope arrived. Same handwriting. No return address. Inside this time, a USB stick. No note. No explanation. I stared at it for 10 minutes, the plastic warm in my hand from my grip. I considered throwing it away. I considered calling the police again. But something in me, the part that used to crave answers, wanted to know. I plugged it into my laptop. One file, a video. It was grainy, black and white, time-stamped 2 weeks ago. It showed my apartment building from a distance. The view zoomed in slowly until it centred on a second-floor window. My window. The camera didn't shake. It didn't move. It had been set up, and whoever was watching, they'd been doing it longer than I realised. I felt cold all over. Buddy was at my side instantly. I hadn't even called him. He pressed against my leg like a wall, grounding me. I closed the laptop, pulled the USB out, threw it across the room. Then I stood up, took a deep breath, and for the first time in weeks, I got angry. I wasn't going to run. Not again. Not like I did from Ethan. Not like I did from my past. This time I was staying, but I wasn't staying defenceless. That afternoon, I bought a security system, motion sensors, smart locks, an extra deadbolt. I even added a doorbell camera. Buddy watched me as I drilled and installed and tested every alert, tail flicking like he was quietly proud. I slept that night with my phone beside me, one hand on his back. No footsteps, no knocks, only his breathing. And for the first time in days, I slept straight through. The calm didn't last long. It was Thursday, late afternoon. The sky was bruising into evening. I was folding laundry when Buddy jolted upright, tail stiff, ears up. 3 seconds later, the doorbell rang. Not just a knock. The bell. Deliberate, I froze. Buddy barked, once, loud, sharp. I grabbed my phone and checked the camera feed. A man, the same from before. Black hoodie, this time with sunglasses, even though it was nearly dark. He leaned toward the camera and said, "I just want to talk." His voice was calm, too calm. Buddy was growling now, a low rumble deep in his throat. The man looked into the lens. "Leah, you know who I am." I didn't. At least, I thought I didn't. I stayed silent. He waited. Then, after a long moment, he turned and walked away. Again, I called the police. Again. This time, they took it seriously. I showed them the photo, the video, the doorbell recording. They said they'd increase patrols, told me to stay with someone if I could, asked if I had anyone close by. I looked at Buddy. "I'm not leaving him," I said. The next day, I stayed home from work. We didn't go on our usual walk. I paced, restless, checking the window every few minutes. Buddy seemed calmer than me, like he knew we were being watched, but also knew we were stronger now. By nightfall, I was wound tight as wire. I sat by the window, lights off, waiting, and at 11:36 p.m, he came back. Not to the front, to the back. Buddy heard him first. He stood, alert, tail stiff. Then I heard it. Clink. Metal. The back door. The one that had jammed last month but still opened if you pulled just right. I didn't move. I waited. Buddy growled, teeth slightly bared, but stayed by my side, waiting for my cue. The door creaked. Then, "Leah!" the voice called, "We need to talk." My heart thundered. I stood, slowly, picked up the phone, and dialed 911. "I have an intruder." "Back door. He's here now." Buddy stepped forward, body low to the ground, muscles taut. I crept toward the kitchen, grabbed the long flashlight from the drawer, held it like a weapon. The voice came again. "Closer. Inside now. I'm not here to hurt you." I stayed behind the wall. Buddy inched forward. Then I saw him. Through the gap in the doorway, just his shape. Too close. I flicked the flashlight on and stepped out. "Get out of my house." He turned, face finally visible, and suddenly I did recognize him. Jason, Ethan's brother. He raised his hands. "Wait, Leah, please, just listen." "Get out," I said, phone to my ear. "Police are on their way." "I'm not here to hurt you," he said again, backing toward the door. "Ethan's gone." "What?" My hand trembled. "Gone." Jason nodded, breathing fast. "He died last month, car accident. But before that, he was watching you after the breakup. He couldn't let go." My mouth went dry. "The letters, the photos, weren't me," Jason said. "But I found the storage unit, found what he kept. I wanted to warn you. I didn't know how." My head spun. Buddy stood between us, unmoving. "Why didn't you just call?" "I tried, but you blocked everyone connected to him." That much was true. "I'm sorry," Jason said again, hands still raised. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay, that you knew it was over." I didn't answer. I only lowered the flashlight slightly. Then blue and red lights flashed through the front window. The police were here. The next hour was a blur. Questions, IDs, explanations. Jason wasn't arrested, but he was warned. The officers took the USB stick, the photo, the video. I gave them everything, and when they left, I stood in the doorway in the cold, watching their taillights disappear. Buddy sat beside me, silent, still, unshaken. Later that night, I opened all the windows, let the air in, let it move. I burned the old letters, threw the box in the bin. I took a deep breath and didn't feel like I was choking for the first time in weeks. Buddy jumped onto the couch and curled up. I sat beside him, curled into his side, my fingers resting on his soft fur. "You knew before I did," I whispered. "You always know." He gave a slow blink, and that was the truth of it. In all of this, in fear, in doubt, in confusion, he was the only one I trusted. Not because he barked, not because he stood guard, but because when everything fell apart, he never left. He waited outside my door, all night, just to come back in. But now, I wasn't waiting anymore. Now I was living, and I wasn't